If you guys think about the muscles that really weaken in us with life, why do some people get more plaque than others, even though seemingly they take really good care of their teeth? A lot of cells that we don't want to be happy have a high level of the enzyme NNMT. For those of you who don't know APOE genotypes, there's basically two polymorphisms, right? Now, if they took GABA and didn't exercise, it didn't raise growth hormone. But if they did exercise with GABA, it dramatically increased.
Welcome to our Q&A highlights. Q&A sessions are recorded every month, and our enhanced members get an exclusive opportunity to ask questions from one of cellular medicine's brightest minds, Dr. Elizabeth Yurth. Get a chance to ask your questions by becoming our enhanced member at bli.academy/memberships. You also get access to our content library full of tips, articles, videos, lectures, previous live Q&A sessions, and more.
What are the best muscles for women to build to help with aging? Well, really, it's just strength training in general, right? We want all your muscles strong. But if you guys think about the muscles that really weaken in us with life, and think about everything we do, it's all forward, right? We're always like this. We're reaching this way. We're picking up our groceries this way. How much should we do that's opening up this direction, right? Our backs. We don't. So our back muscles, and that's why you see people as they get older, right? They get very stooped over. Our back muscles get much, much weaker. So I really emphasize that it's those pull muscles, it's those back muscles. So, pull-ups, rows, things like that, that really strengthen that posterior chain, I think are critically important. Shoulders too, because we don't really do a lot of lifting overhead in our lives, right? Unless you're a construction guy or something. But women really less so, right? So we start to lose shoulders muscle. So you have to really work on strengthening the shoulders and then the posterior chain of the legs too, because the same thing. We don't work those much. So glutes, so important. Your hamstrings, really critically important because those are really critical factors supporting knee strength too. So I would go after that posterior chain as my most aggressive, but I will emphasize that you should have a well-rounded strength program that's emphasizing all of the muscles. A lot of patients, they really like their human growth hormone over the peptide secretagogues. There's downsides to continuous use. There really is. Human growth hormone, when you give it, it's a super physiologic dose of growth hormone. So you get this big, huge bump in it, much more than probably your body would typically produce rather acutely. And so, initially that's probably good. If you continually do that, because it has this transient insulin-like effect, if you're continually doing that, you actually start to potentially cause insulin resistance. So it becomes antagonistic to insulin. It also starts inhibiting glucose uptake into muscles. So the long-term results of this big surges down is not so good. And that's why we like the peptides, because they keep it, not as robust, but a much more homeostatic level of growth hormone. They talked about a large number of failures of something called the Profemur total hip system. And what happened with this Profemur system was designed, and I remember when it came out, it was the coolest because you could actually change the stem size. So hips have a ball part and a stem that goes into the femur, and you could change the stem size so it would fit better into different type of patients. And so everybody was really gigged out on it, and a lot of them got put in. Well, then the problem was that adjustable stem just started breaking off randomly in people. And so the device actually was released in 2005, I believe, and they started seeing these fractures, 10 years later. So it was released earlier than that. And then in 2005, they started seeing these rash of fractures, but they didn't recall the device until 15 years later. So they just started really recalling the device 15 years after that. Now, to be realistic, it was still a small number of people affected by this, only 5% of people. It was still not a huge number of people who this happened to. It was just a substantial enough number that we should recall the device and not ever use it again. It's such a good replacement as far as replacements go. So these hip replacements, people do really well. They walk out of the hospital and they feel really good. When a hip is replaced in 50 and younger, basically the likelihood of it needing to be replaced again sometime in their life is close to 50%. So if you replace a hip in a young person, likely they're going to need a second replacement. We sort of give the number of 15 years, and probably hips are lasting a little bit longer than that, maybe closer to 20 years now. But, if we're all going to live to 120, that could be a substantial number of replacements of the hip over and over again. You could take thymosin alpha-1 safely all the time if you want. It just becomes expensive. But other than that, there's no downsides to it. So thymosin alpha-1, if you guys recall, is one of our immune modulating peptides made by our thymus gland. Problem is, we don't have thymus glands as we get older because we have this giant gland in our chest called the thymus that controls our immune system. At puberty, it starts to shrink. It's smaller and smaller and smaller. And so if you get back thymosin alpha 1, which is made by the thymus gland, you can help the immune system stay nice and hearty. So for muscle building, you probably want straight GABA. If you want the neurologic benefits, gabapentin, which is a prescription drug, might be better. So it was a 2003 study that was 7 people. So it was very small, that showed a significant increase in growth hormone when people exercised and took GABA. Now, if they took GABA and didn't exercise, it didn't raise growth hormone. But if they did exercise with GABA, it dramatically increased growth hormone production right after exercise, which is what we want. We want this big growth hormone IGF surge for IGF, insulin-like growth factor, to go into the muscles to build muscles. So, and it was much better than just the exercise alone. But it was a 7-person study. That was 2003. And then there was a 2019 study where they looked at muscle mass. It was a larger study, but not huge, maybe 30 some people. And they took 24 to 48-year-olds and they had them do whey protein with GABA and measure growth hormone concentrations after exercise. And what they found is that the whey protein alone group did actually significantly increase growth hormone. So we know whey protein is really important. That's why I like to push protein right after, like a protein shake right after exercise if you really want to muscle build. But whey protein alone did significantly elevate. If you added the GABA in, it was much more marked. So again, significant increase in fat-free body mass as well in that group. So small study, one study, I don't know, but I think it's worth an N1 trial. Try it and see if you get more benefits from it, right? I think it's a very low risk thing to do. For those of you who don't know APOE genotypes, there's basically 2 polymorphisms, right? There's 3 different types. There's E2, E3, and E4. And you get one from your mom and one from your dad. So you might be a 2-2 or a 2-3 or a 3-3 or a 3-4 or a 4-4. The people who have lucky enough to get the APOE2 are protected. So the 2-2s, super protected. Very rare get dementia. They have really good cholesterol profiles. Everything looks perfect. And the 2-3s, pretty good too. And then 3-3s are sort of your average Joe person. And then the 3-4s, higher risk of dementia. They have one of the bad genes. The APOE4 is the bad one, right? So they have one of the bad SNPs. And the 4-4 people are the bigger culprits. They're the ones who we have to really keep an eye on because they have a very, very high incidence of developing Alzheimer's dementias. 1-MNA is an NNMT, so nicotinamide N-methyltransferase blocker. When we keep feeding people NAD and NR and NMN, a lot of cells that we don't want to be happy have a high level of the enzyme NNMT. NNMT grabs that NAD and it takes it down and it feeds the cells you don't want, one of which is fat cells, right? So fat cells have a much higher level of NNMT. So they're much more able to take this NAD and feed it down their cycle. Their goal is to make you fatter. The answer to this question lies in looking at, is NNMT associated with obesity? And indeed, it's actually very associated with obesity. So NNMT, very associated with obesity, type 2 diabetes. And if you knock down or inhibit NNMT, you significantly increase energy expenditure, reduce body weight, reduce white adipose tissue, improve insulin sensitivity, normalize glucose tolerance, help fasting blood glucose. So pretty significant benefits to this in the obesity world. You're going to prevent obesity by using an NNMT knockdown. They're really not available. People are trying to invent them, but we have one. So 1-MNA is a NNMT blocker. So I think 1-MNA is, our answer to how do we keep NAD levels high, which is going to keep us healthier? How do we keep cancer cells at bay? How do we keep our glucose metabolism optimal? I think 1-MNA is something probably we should all be taking for that. So thymosin beta-4, a peptide, talked about it for healing. Well, they make eye drops. And in fact, it's actually released as a drug called RGN-259. There's really some significant improvement in helping dry eyes, but also just overall improving eye health in general. So we really like thymosin beta-4 eye drops. And we use that hand in hand lots of times with making platelet-rich plasma eye drops. Remember, the platelet-rich plasma contains all these growth factors, so it really helps to heal the eye too. And then there's an eye drop called Visomintin, harder to get. It actually comes from Russia, and it contains a mitochondrial antioxidant called SKQ1, and it was really developed for dry eyes disease and glaucoma, but also optic neuropathies, and has a lot of sort of healing properties. Although harder to find, but very unique because it's an antioxidant that works at the mitochondrial level in the eye. So it's really cool. So Visomintin. And then CanC, readily available at your Walgreens. CanC is N-acetylcarnosine, and it's been shown to effectively treat cataracts, but it's really helpful for eye health in general. First of all, the plaque that forms on our teeth is completely different from the plaque that forms on our arteries. So they're not sort of interchangeable. The plaque in our teeth is really this bacteria-laden, it's biofilm actually that occurs from bacteria. And it's actually probably inflammatory changes that occur with this bacteria that creates this biofilm that builds up around teeth. And, why do some people get more plaque than others, even though seemingly they take really good care of their teeth? And does that mean they're going to have a higher risk of atherosclerosis or heart disease? It probably does. And probably the correlation is low-grade inflammation. So probably the correlation between these plaque formers is that there's a low-grade inflammatory process. Likely we all get some bacteria. And even with our best dental health, we get bacteria on our teeth, but we don't get this big inflammatory response. So we don't form the plaque as much, just like cholesterol in our arteries is until it becomes oxidized and creates an inflammatory response is not the culprit. So let's say there's this bacteria on the gum until that bacteria stimulates a big inflammatory response. So likely people who get this more plaque formation have higher levels of just low-grade inflammation.